So one of the things that I think brokers and tenants don't really comprehend are building systems. And one of the biggest one is HVAC. Can you define the different types you see in New York City in the office buildings? They're only like, I believe there's only like three or four of them.
All right, I think the first thing we want to do is define the office buildings. And in that regard, you have what we call A-class buildings, B buildings, and otherwise. So let's talk about the A buildings for a moment, which are the newer buildings, the high-rise, mostly enclosed in glass, post-war for the most part. The air conditioning systems in those buildings have evolved since the post-war era. And in the earlier years, the 50s, 60s, 70s, even up to the 90s, the systems were centralized. There might be a mechanical floor. They would send air down a shaft, and air conditioning would serve multiple floors. That was a particular problem in the buildings that were insulated with asbestos in the late 50s because the central air conditioning system would pick up that insulation, and the particles get it into the return air and would redistribute it throughout all the floors that were served by that air conditioning system. Over the years, of course, they've outlawed the use of asbestos, but most buildings have had all of the asbestos abated and removed, so it's no longer a problem. But in the late 90s, what happened was they found that it's more efficient to have decentralized air conditioning. And in the A buildings, what you will find is typically one or two air conditioners on each floor serving that particular floor. It allows for more flexibility with the hours of operation and the months of operation. And the months of operation are really a big deal when a tenant is looking for space, because some buildings will only provide air conditioning, mechanical air conditioning in the summer months. Other buildings will provide some means of cooling all year. And that's a very important thing to be looking at when you're looking at new space.
Now, if you're going to a pre-war building, what's that like?
So in pre-war buildings, I would say it could be a hodgepodge. Most of the pre-war buildings have punched windows, which are basically they're masonry or brick buildings with windows, usually operable windows. And when the buildings were built pre-war, there was no air conditioning. So air conditioning in those buildings was added on an ad hoc basis by each tenant typically, and units might be going through windows. In some cases, those are called air-cooled air conditioners, and they can be anywheres on a floor, assuming the landlord allows you to put louvers in through windows anywheres on the floor. Other pre-war buildings have had what is called a cooling tower put on the roof of the building, and with condenser water distributed down the building, providing a means to air condition without having to put large louvers out the facade of the building. And in that case, the landlord would generally service the cooling tower, and then you have to look at what months of the year and what hours of the day the landlord is actually running that tower to make sure that it satisfies your particular needs.
So when you talk about these air conditioning units in these pre-war buildings, and let's say they have package units on those floors, sometimes the landlord doesn't put a big enough package unit on the floor. When I got in the business, it used to be 300 square feet per ton. In today's environment, what do you think if you're going to a pre-war building, you should be asking for?
Well, I think the numbers haven't changed dramatically. The energy code has mandated a reduction in overall use of electricity. So 35 years ago, lighting might have been 3 to 4 watts a square foot. Today, the energy code doesn't allow it to be more than a watt a square foot. So the reality is air conditioning requirements have actually gone down over the years, except of course if you have like a data center or a trading
Right.
floor or something. But in general, your rule of thumb, 300 to 400 square foot per ton on the net usable footage, not on the rentable, is probably still applicable.
When you say net usable, are you using REPNY net usable? What is the definition you're using? I'm sorry, I'm asking. Are you
I would
using
say
BOMA?
carpetable.
So now that we've talked about the air conditioning, I remember I was doing a publishing deal, a small publishing deal, 5,000 square feet, and the leasing agent was saying, "I'm only going to give you 3 to 4 watts," because I was always taught you need about 6 watts. So why don't you just explain that, because it's important for the tenant to know how many watts does he or she need when they're leasing space.
All right, it's a great question, and it's a little complicated, it's a little technical, but it's really, really important. And this is where very often, I would say the brokers understand it, but I would say the attorneys don't really get it. And this is where you need an engineer to get in and really help you out. In the old days, you're right, it was 5 to 6 watts per square foot. And
Wasn't it per usable?
so again, some leases would specify, some wouldn't. The ideal situation would have been 6 watts per rentable square foot, which is, as you know, like, 30% more footage. And also, you would want it on demand rather than connected. Some landlords were wise guys, and they would try to give you the power in the lease based on connected load. And as you know, when you plug something in, it doesn't always use all the power that it's rated for. But the landlords would go around and they would reevaluate after you move in, and they would add up all the nameplate data, and then they would say you exceeded the connected load that we allowed you, even though you weren't using that power. So the new leases now pretty much are all written, and the landlords pretty much have resigned themselves to giving the power based on demand for the most part. And if it doesn't say demand, you need an engineer or an attorney to help you get it. But then the question is, how many watts per square foot? As I mentioned earlier on the air conditioning, the same has happened on the power. Where it used to be 6 watts a square foot, 5 to 6, we're down to like 3.5 to 4 watts a square foot demand these days. I still think we should be asking for 5 to 6 watts when we go to market, because you may need supplemental air conditioning or you may have special appliances, but don't expect to actually use a demand of anything over 4 watts a square foot these days. And don't walk away from a deal if the landlord is standing firm on say 4 rather than 6. That's where you need your engineer to really take a look at it and help make things happen.